This is Cruise Radio.
Cruise Radio is brought to you in part by tripinsurance.com. Travel insurance done right by the people who know travel insurance. Get a quote today at tripinsurance.com.
Here we go.
Broadcasting from the tripinsurance.com studios in Jacksonville, Florida. This is Cruise Radio.
Matt just returned from a 7-night cruise on Royal Caribbean's Radiance of the Seas. It went out of the port of Tampa, Florida, and he joins us on the line. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Doug, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to talk to you again. It's been about 5 years or so excited to get your take on Radiance of the Seas. You took this one with your parents. Now, what made you, taking a step back here before we get to Radiance, what made you want to take this cruise? You're up in the Philadelphia or the Pittsburgh area, I should say. What made you want to take this one?
This cruise was with my parents who are older. They're actually both in their 80s. So one of my good friends and I, we decided to take them on this cruise. And it was actually a belated anniversary present that I had given them a couple of years ago. And we, through a series of other issues, we just really couldn't get it together. And last fall made the decision that we were going to book this for early March of 2025. And so we decided to go with Radiance. And whenever I was looking at different ships, there's a lot of factors that I consider because I am traveling with my parents who are older. Mm-hmm. And the size of the ship is always one of them. While I am interested to try some of the larger, newer ships, for them, that would never work just because they're way too big, way too much walking and too much ground to cover. So we typically stick with the smaller ships, which tend to be a little bit older. And, those have their benefits. They also have some drawbacks, depending on how you look at it. But really, it was the size of the ship and to a certain extent, some of the ports that we were going to that made this cruise on Radiance really attractive for us for this time of the year that we were looking to go.
What's wild is the last time we spoke, you were like on one of the very last cruises before the shutdown, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It was March of 2020 and we were on Celebrity Equinox. Mm-hmm. COVID was just starting to really take off. It was the week that the CDC had shut down cruising and we were at dinner on the final night of the cruise, which was a Friday, and saw a post come through on Twitter that as of the next day on Saturday, cruising was going to be shut down. And we left that ship and that was the last cruise for over a year, right?
Yeah, and that's behind us, and Radiance is in front of us now. So you make your way from Pittsburgh down to Tampa. Any pre-cruise time before you boarded Radiance?
Yeah, so we always go the day before, one, just for ease and, the lower stress of the travel. And, two, just to hopefully experience, a day in the city that we're in. I've been to Tampa a few times because one of my best friends lives there. But my parents hadn't been there. My friend had not been there. And so while we were there, we actually decided to take this really cool golf cart tour around the city.
Nice.
It was awesome. Highly recommended for anyone that's spending a day in Tampa. They picked us up right at our hotel, which was great, partly because of the accessibility issues for my parents. But, it was a couple-hour tour around the city, got to see a bunch of really cool sights in Tampa. We actually drove right by the port of Tampa. We saw one of the Margaritaville ships that were docked there at the time. Mm-hmm. Our ship was obviously not back yet because it was just coming back from the cruise that we would be taking the next day. It was just really cool to kind of get a preview of the port area before we actually embarked the ship the next day. But great tour, great food in Tampa. And always like to go the day before just in case, coming from the Northeast, never know what the weather is going to be like in the winter. And we've had some really bad experiences in the past when we've tried to go out the day of the cruise and hit some bad weather and literally almost missed the boat. So, really like to go the day before and just, relax, take in the city, and have a leisurely embarkation day. So highly recommend always doing that for sure.
Living in Florida, I've never really even thought of taking a golf cart tour of a city. So am I like picturing this correctly, where it's like Ybor City, and you mentioned the harbor front and like notable sites like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We went through the downtown area, went through Ybor, went through the port area, and I forget what the shopping area was called. Right around, kind of close to the port area, but it was just a really really cool tour, and something that I just found by Googling, things to do in Tampa. So
awesome.
highly recommend.
So you go to board Radiance of the Seas the next day. How was the embarkation process? And you mentioned you were traveling with your folks that have some accessibility. How do you say that correctly without sound like a rude, like I'm rude?
Let's say accessibility issues.
That's okay.
Their
I'll say
issues
that.
are more on the mobility side.
Okay.
But yeah, accessibility.
Okay. So let me ask you that again. I never know how to say things these days. So
yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
I know.
So let's talk about embarkation here for Radiance of the Seas. Now, you mentioned you're traveling with your parents who have some accessibility issues. So boarding the ship, how was that facilitated? Like, was there any early boarding involved? And how long did it take from the curb to stepping on Radiance?
The embarkation process was pretty simple. I mean, I'll start from the time we got out of the Uber. I had prearranged wheelchair assistance for my parents for embarkation and debarkation, and there were porters there with wheelchairs ready to go. So I just flagged a couple of them over. My parents sat down. The porters took our luggage. You know how it goes, never to be seen again until it's on the ship. And it was super simple. The terminal in Tampa, it's not like one of the newer terminals that's real, glitzy and, a lot of bells and whistles, but who cares? I mean, from the time we got out of our Uber until we were on the ship, it was about I would say 20 minutes to a half an hour, but that was really only because there's a handoff point from the time the porters take the wheelchairs into the terminal until there are pushers from the ship that are ship employees that take the wheelchairs onto the ship. We were not allowed to push them ourselves. So that's what took about 10 minutes or so. But if we didn't have to wait for staff to push them onto the ship, we would have been on from curb to ship in 10 minutes. I mean, super simple process.
Wow, that's awesome. And you mentioned you've been on quite a few Royal Caribbean ships. What were your impressions stepping on Radiance this time around?
We've been on a sister ship on Radiance a couple of times. We've been on Jewel of the Seas, so we were pretty familiar with the layout of the ship. But I tell you, no matter what ship I get on, every time I step on the ship, and this is one of the older classic ships with the midship centrum that goes almost the entire way up to the sky. I mean, from deck 3 to 12 or something. I am always just amazed. And it's just that even though it's an older ship, it feels fresh and clean and bright. And this ship was no exception. It has that older classic feel, and if people have only been on, the newer, more modern ships, it might be a little different for them getting on this type of a ship. But I mean, I've been on a lot of cruises over the years, and this is just that really, it still has that really classic, almost upscale feeling. Well, another thing that I'll say is very, very well kept. I mean, the ship is extremely clean, despite its age. There's no, paint chipping, just no blemishes really anywhere, which is really amazing, I think, for a ship of this age. I just can't say enough about how well they keep up these older ships. So very, very nice. Very good first impressions as we stepped on.
Yeah, and I believe this ship was, the Radiance class, the whole class was designed with, I think, Alaska in mind, right? Because there's a lot of glass around the atriums, correct?
Absolutely. And in fact, the main elevators that go up through the centrum area, the atrium in the middle, they face outward. So, there's two sets. There's some that face inside into the centrum, but then there's the outward facing elevators, and it's all glass on the outside. So from the bottom floor all the way up, it's all glass. And so it's like you're just moving right up. It's like you're going right up into the sky. It's
Nice.
really cool to take those elevators. So really fun.
Let's talk about the stateroom here on Radiance of the Seas. Now, there was 4 of you traveling. So what kind of stateroom did you have, and what were your thoughts of it throughout the week?
So we had balcony cabins. We always try to get balconies when we can. Just, I don't even sit out on the balcony that much. But it just having that extra little bit of space, being able to go outside without having to go up on one of the main decks is always so nice, and it's nice to put a wet shirt out there or a swimsuit or things like that. The cabin, again, for being an older ship, the cabin actually felt to me fairly spacious compared to some of the other balcony staterooms I've been on other ships. Walked in, closet on the right, bathroom immediately on the left. And we had the setups in both of our staterooms where the desk area and the little sofa was at the front part of the room. And then the beds were back toward the balcony, toward the outward side, which I actually like. I like walking in and having the open area in the front. Mm-hmm. And just a tip for anyone looking for the layout of the cabin. And I'm one of those people that likes to research every little detail of a ship, of a cabin. I try to find exact pictures of the cabin I'm going to stay. I mean, maybe it's a little obsessive. I don't know. But I really like to find out as much as I could. And apparently on some of the deck plan websites, you can tell where the beds are positioned. Like if you find a picture of one cabin, they alternate. So in one cabin, the beds are closer to the door. And then in the next cabin, they're closer to the balcony or to the window. So that's how you can tell where the bed or the couch placement is, if you're really specific about it, like I am.
Well, we're not judging you there, so.
That's why your podcasts and the videos and, and all the website content, that's why it's all terrific, because of obsessive people like me. But overall, the cabin was the one part of the ship I would say started to show its age just a little bit. In terms of just the decor, but also, some of the wood is starting to look a little, I don't want to say beaten up, but you can tell it's been well used. The bathroom, they're all small. These staterooms have the classic, curved curtain. So, mind your steps when you're in the shower, and also try to keep the curtain inside so you don't have a flood in the main part of the bathroom, which I foolishly did the first day. But overall, still enough space for everything that you need for a week.
All right, very nice. Now, did your parents have the same type of stateroom?
Yeah, we were just a couple of staterooms away from each other.
Okay, gotcha. So let's talk about the food on Radiance of the Seas, and we'll go to the buffet area, the Windjammer, as Royal Caribbean calls it. What did you think of the food up there, and did it ever feel too crowded during the 7 nights?
I thought the food overall was very, very good. There was every day they had different options. There are standard options that are there every day. There's always pizza, there's always burgers and fries, there's always a big salad bar. And, the features in those areas may vary a bit from day to day, but there's always standard fare for you. Like if you want just the main classic stuff, always the same. And then there's several different lines that change out from meal to meal, whether it's, whether it's like, Mexican type dishes, or they have a lot of, like Indian fare and Asian fare, trying to cater, I think, to a broad audience. But overall, I thought the food was very tasty in the Windjammer. I don't know. I'm not super tough to please when it comes to that stuff. I enjoy fine dining as much as I enjoy a buffet. So, I can always find something, but everything that I had, I thought was overall very, very good. So, no real complaints about the buffet at all. In terms of congestion, I think it really depends on when when you go. There were times where we were getting off, fairly early. And so we'd want to get up there for breakfast. And yeah, it does get crowded at the peak meal times. But if you're not real particular about when you go, or, you might consider going toward the end of a meal time, like for the later time of breakfast, for example, no crowds at all, lots of tables. There were a couple of days when we were getting off in ports, and we were trying to do a late breakfast to make that kind of our main meal for the middle of the day. And so by the time we got up for breakfast, it was, a lot of people had already had breakfast. They had already gotten off the ship. Now, the one warning I will give, if you are going toward the end of a mealtime, say breakfast or lunch, is that about 30 minutes before the end of that meal service, they start to close down like half of the buffet. So some of the things that might have been featured on one half are no longer available. For breakfast, for example, in that last 15 to 30 minutes, they didn't have omelets, for example. And, my mom always likes an omelet for breakfast. And so a couple of days she was bummed because she couldn't get her omelet. So things like that. So, if you want the full experience, don't go whenever they're starting to close them down. But they always had selections up until the official closing time. So always stuff to eat, but just, a caution if you want everything and don't want them to shut anything down, on you too early.
As far as the main dining room, what time dining did you have, and how was your experience in there throughout the week?
We had a phenomenal experience the entire week. We tend to do the my time dining, just because the early seating is way too early. We like to be either in port or at the pool and don't want to have to pack up at 4:00 for a 5 or 5:30 dinner time. And, on the opposite end, the late seating is just too late for us. So we like to do the my time dining. And here's actually a tip that, I've done a couple other times and this has served me well, is as soon as we got on the ship, I went down and I talked to the maitre d' and was able to make a reservation for a specific time every night. We had the same table, the same service. So it was like we had a standard seating dinner time, but we were able to take advantage of the my time dining. And so I think our reservation every night was like 6:30. And we had a standing reservation. We were able to bypass the line of the people that just went down whenever they felt like it. And sometimes those lines were pretty long. We got some side eyes because we were able to literally walk right past the line, right past the maitre d' stand, and right to our table because we had a standing reservation for the same time every night. So if you want a standard time every night, but don't want to do early or late, my recommendation is you go talk to the maitre d' on that first day and try to get a standing reservation. It really, really helped us.
I'm curious, does that involve slipping a 20 these days still?
Not always. That does help. And I did. And I don't know whether that helped or not. They're always super helpful, but never hurts to slip a few dollars and, in appreciation of good service or anticipated good service.
Any specialty venues on this 7-nighter?
So actually, no. So I am from the old school time of cruising where everything except the alcohol was included, including all the food. And so in all of my cruises since specialty dining became a thing, there has only been one time that I did a specialty restaurant, and this one was no exception. So it was either buffet or main dining room for all of our meals. I think it's kind of a principle thing for me. I feel like I've already paid all this money for the cruise and I'm not paying for food that I feel like I've already paid for. Now the only exceptions to that for me might be if I'm on a bigger, newer ship and there's some of those really fun new venues that, are just a really cool experience or have really unique foods. But for a standard specialty restaurant, like on Royal, there's Chops, there's Giovanni's, there's Izumi. To to me, they're just not worth it. But I am from old school cruising days, and I just don't do it.
I realize this is an older ship. Does this have a Sorrento's for pizza?
So that's on this ship, there was something in the solarium called, actually, I think it was called the Solarium Cafe. And that was where they served, lighter fare for a lighter lunch. Like they had a salad bar in there. You could always get, pizza, sandwiches. They had a couple of specialty things in there throughout the day. And then that is where the late night food is on this ship. So, on some ships, they might have a couple of offerings now in the buffet area. I mean, it's nothing like it used to be with the big buffets. But, on a lot of ships, they'll open a portion of the buffet and they'll have pizza or burgers or a couple of bites later at night. On this ship, the Solarium Cafe was used midday for lunch and mid-afternoon snack options. And then later at night, they had sandwiches, pizzas, cookies, things like that. But that was the only place later at night that you could actually go to get something to eat.
Gotcha. How about the entertainment on this 7-night cruise? What did y'all think of it, and how did it stack up?
Overall, I thought the entertainment was really good. Some of the best entertainment was all of the different musicians and performers that they would have stationed around the ship, like the piano player in the schooner bar, the bands and musical acts that they would have in the Centrum area. Really, really terrific. And, there in the evening, especially, there was always something going on in that Centrum area. A group might play for an hour or two, and in between they might take a 15-minute break, but there was always something going on. So it never felt dull. Always something to listen to, always really good musicians around the ship. I thought that the entertainment in the main theater was decent. I wouldn't stack it up against, I wouldn't call it some of the best entertainment I've seen on a cruise, which was a little disappointing, but overall it was pretty good. Okay. I tell you, a couple of the specialty acts though that they had in the main theater were terrific. We saw, and I wish I could remember his name, but he was a juggler and comedian. And, he started off with some jokes and it was a little bit quirky, but I'll tell you, once he got into his act, he was phenomenal. And the way he interacted with the audience while he was juggling, and it wasn't just juggling like throwing the I don't know what they're called, the baton things into the air. I mean, he did these things where it was like a life-size yo-yo. And I mean, he was bouncing a life-size yo-yo back and forth on these like threads from one side of the theater to the other. I mean, it was just amazing. And I mean, he was phenomenal. Another feature that what blew our minds was one of the production shows was called Tango Buenos Aires. And overall the production was very, very good. But there were these two featured dancers that were absolutely phenomenal. I mean, they did, these tango numbers and the traditional, Latin dancing. And I mean, he was throwing his partner up into the air like it was nothing. And I mean, phenomenal. I mean, the precision, just the talent was amazing. And I mean, they did one show, but they were on the ship the whole week. And so I don't know if that's one of those rotating shows where they go from ship to ship. But the rest of the production was the Royal Caribbean singers and dancers. So I don't know, but it was one of the best things I think I've ever seen on a cruise ship. They were absolutely phenomenal.
I forgot, this ship has a cinema, doesn't it?
Yeah, it has a full theater. They did run some first run or close to first run movies. I don't really do the movies on a cruise just because there's a lot of other things that I'm typically trying to do. But yeah, they had a movie theater, a couple of showings throughout the day, every day. They also would show movies up on the main deck at night. And so, later at night, we would be walking, from the casino or the showroom, and we'd want to go get a snack in the Solarium Cafe because, we hadn't eaten in about an hour, right?
Right.
And so we would walk up on deck and they were always showing movies. And there would be people out there hanging out watching movies. So it was pretty neat.
The casino on this ship, as far as the cigarette smoke and, in and around the casino, because on this class of ship, you have like the casino, the schooner bar, but then you have like these couple of specialty restaurants more towards the aft. Was the smoke pretty much contained within just the casino?
Yeah, I mean, they do a pretty good job of containing the smoke in the casino, but in the casino, the smoke is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Even on the non-smoking side, you could still smell it, even if it wasn't really wafting over there. The actual smoke wasn't over there. It was the odor was still there. And, it's a smaller casino. I mean, it's a smaller ship. So, nothing is huge, but the casino itself was fairly small and pretty tight to get through. I mentioned accessibility, and, if you have a wheelchair or a scooter or a walker, very difficult to get through in a lot of places. And I just don't know what could be done about that other than taking machines out, frankly. But I played a little bit every night. I was willing to, I say I make my donations every night. Unfortunately, no big winner here, but, I enjoy it. I enjoy going in, and even the smoke doesn't bother me tremendously, but, it is noticeable whenever you're in there. And, if you're sitting in the smoking section, you're going to be sitting next to someone that's likely smoking, and that's just the reality of it. But one thing I could change if I could is I would wish the whole thing would be non-smoking.
It's funny you say about trying to get through that and it's a little tight, because that's one thing I've noticed, especially since the restart over the past 4 years or so, is that like they're just shoving so many slot machines in these casinos, where I've noticed ships where the walkway was, they added one more machine at the end of each row. So it's, cutting the walkway, the passageway down by 3 feet, 2.5 feet or so. And I'm seeing more and more of that as people are making their donations, as you say.
Yeah, that's true. And actually, now that I think about it, everywhere it was really congested was on those end caps where there's a machine and a stool. So, but I mean, I get it. Revenue's the name of the game. They're not running a charity, but it's still not easy to get through, especially if you have accessibility or mobility issues.
Out of curiosity about accessibility, this might help someone listening. Are your parents in a wheelchair or a scooter?
So my dad used a rollator, one of those, wheeled walker things, just for more stability on the ship.
Yeah.
He has some balance issues. And so he used that walking around the ship. But again, in a place like the casino, unless we collapsed it was hard to get through a lot of places. So, there were some nights where he didn't even want to go in the casino because it was just too frustrating to get through. My mom, we hadn't planned on using any sort of equipment, but she was having some problems with her back and her legs. We had inquired about, we didn't plan for a scooter or a wheelchair in advance, but if we cruise again, we absolutely, I think, would plan on that in advance, which is one of the tips that I have. But we had gone down to guest services just to inquire about whether they might have any extra of the motorized scooters on board. And, we knew it was a long shot because typically those have to be reserved in advance and they're through a third party company. But, we got some mixed messaging from guest services. We went down and, I had asked, I said, might by chance there be any on board that weren't being used or any extras? And so they called the, I don't know if it's an accessibility office or wherever those come from on the ship. And, it was back and forth a bit to see whether they had any. And they said, well, we're going to check. We'll call the cabin and we will leave a message to let you know whether we have one. So I told my mom that. And I said, they're going to call and let you know. Well, from the time that I was down at guest services until the time she was back in her cabin was maybe about 45 minutes. They called and said, yes, we have one available. Let us know if you want it. Well, by the time, I mean, it was within an hour. We went back down to guest services and she was all excited to get it. And they said, we're sorry, it's no longer available. I understand that they can't hold them indefinitely, but they specifically called and told us that one was available. And then that really upset her because she was expecting at that point that there would have been one. And this was on day 2 of the cruise.
Oh, wow.
So one tip I have is that if you think you might need a scooter or any sort of assistance devices, always reserve them in advance. That was one thing that really did sort of detract from part of the experience. And again, we didn't think we were going to need it, but then when we were told there was one available, we were really excited. And then to be told that it wasn't available less than an hour later, they said that it was really frustrating and it really upset her. They were able to give us a wheelchair to use during the week. So for especially the longer distances, we were able to push her, using the wheelchair. And we actually did use the wheelchair in one of the ports. But, that's just one of my tips on accessibility is, to definitely inquire about and rent any equipment that you might need in advance.
Which plays into the ports here. So you leave the port of Tampa and you head to your first port of call. Give us that first port. Give us the highlight, then we can move to the next one.
So first port was Cozumel. I know there are a couple of different piers in Cozumel. I'm not exactly sure which one we were at, but that day, we just walked around the port area. It was nice. It was relaxing. I think we were the only ship docked there that day. And so it wasn't crowded at all in the port area. It has a lot of your typical, the souvenir shops, the chocolate shops, several Mexican pharmacies where you can get prescription drugs if you like them, if you need them, over the counter. One thing that played into a bit of the inconsistency that I was sort of alluding to before had to do with information about the ports. So in Cozumel, I had gone to guest services again because in previous trips, there had been the bicycle rickshaws or whatever the guys are called, that they have the bikes and, you can get a ride from the ship to the end of the pier. Well, they said, oh, yes, they'll be available outside. And of course, they're for either a tip or a fee, and no problem. Absolutely happy to do that. But once again, we got outside and there were none to be had. And when I inquired about it again, they said, oh, they must be at the other pier. And so there's just an inconsistency in information that once again was really frustrating. Fortunately, we had the wheelchair at that point. So, I was able to, play, transport, and I was able to take my mom and then my dad back and forth with one wheelchair, which actually was totally fine. But, once again, would have been nice to know that, just to manage expectations. And one other thing, if I may, while we're talking about accessibility, is that, I really think that the cruise lines need to do better about accessibility and transportation at any port you're going to, whether it is a tram, whether it is having rickshaws, golf carts, wheelchair access, whatever that may be, because, if you have any sort of mobility issues, those piers can be really, really long. But I would just recommend that any of these cruise lines have, any sort of transportation that they can, just to enhance the guest experience. I think it would make it a lot more enjoyable and a lot less stressful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. So you wrap up Cozumel. What was your next port of call?
So the next one was Roatan, Honduras. That was one of the best ports on the entire cruise. The port area, of course, has been, redeveloped and built up by the cruise line. We didn't do any excursions in Roatan, but we sat around the port area, which was very, very nice. And one bonus about this port area, and it's not Mahogany Bay. There's the other one, and Cox and Hole, I believe it's called. really the port or the pier is actually very short there because the ship, at least our ship, pulled right up to right next to shore almost. And we were able to walk right off, very short walk into the port area. Again, we were the only ship in port that day. A lot of really nice shopping. There was a beach area there with some, beach chairs. There's like a lazy river type of a pool, some restaurants and things. And it was just a really enjoyable day sitting around the port area, hanging out in a couple of the restaurants and the bars. And just really enjoying the port. It was really nice. That was actually, I think, if I had to pick a favorite on this ship, I think that's it.
Okay.
It was really cool.
Yeah. And with Roatan, does this one have is it as developed or is it still a work in progress?
The actual port area is fairly well developed at this point. All the shopping is in and open, and it doesn't appear that they're building anything new there right now. They may be expanding the pool area a bit because if I remember correctly, off to the side, past the beach and the big lazy river pool, looked like they were doing a little bit of construction, but not building construction. It all looked to be ground level construction. So I think they might be enhancing the pool areas there. But yeah, it was really, really nice.
And then after Roatan, what was up next?
Next was Belize. This was actually a tender port. So fairly easy. Now, one caveat there is, again, on the accessibility thing, if you are in a wheelchair and can't really do stairs, that would present a challenge because on this ship, whenever you scan your badge to get off the ship, you have to go down about 8 or 10 steps onto the platform to get on the tender boat. Now, we were all able to do that. My parents were able to still do stairs. So that really wasn't a problem. But if you're in a wheelchair and you really can't do stairs, probably wouldn't be a port that you would be able to get off at or be able to be able to navigate fairly easily. But, once we got on the tender, we took about a 20-minute tender ride over to the port. And again, very short walk from the tender boat into the main port area. Again, a lot of standard fare. There are several different ports that the tender boats pull up to. And, there were, I believe, 3 other ships in port that day. So while there were a lot of people, it actually never felt really crowded. I would say of all the ports that we were at, that one felt the most, I will say, authentic in terms of cruise ports, or maybe less commercially developed. I mean, there's some of the standard stores like, Diamonds International and Cariloha is at the Bamboo store. But a lot of them are more local vendors, local souvenir shops, food vendors and things like that. So in Belize, that was the one port that we took an excursion in, and we did a Belize city trolley tour, which was actually really nice. It was only about an hour, which was it was enough time to get a flavor for the city. And it took us through, the older parts of town, some of the newer parts of the city, really gave us a flavor for, the actual town of Belize City. Of course, you see everything from, higher end homes and, yachts and things like that to where a lot of the locals live and how they make their money. It was fun. It was an open air trolley tour. Accessibly, it was very nice, easy on, easy off. So, I highly recommend that. And it was fairly, as excursions go, fairly inexpensive too. I want to say it was about $50 per person. Belize was a nice port. I really enjoyed going there.
Yeah, I was going to say, and I like to hear that you actually did something that wasn't every time I ask someone how their day was in Belize, they stayed on the ship or they went to the ruins or went river tubing. But I didn't even realize that tour existed. So I'm glad to hear that there's actually other things to do if you don't want to get into a river tube or take a full day on doing a ruins tour.
Yeah, a lot of the excursions are, high activity. And, I like to do that kind of stuff. My friend likes to do that kind of stuff. But because we were with my parents, we're trying to do things that were, easier for them and things that they could also really enjoy. And so that it was a nice, accessible excursion.
Was that your last port of call, or did you have one more?
Oh, no, we had one more, which was Costa Maya.
Okay.
I love the Costa Maya cruise pier. It's a big port. There was us, and I believe Royal's Harmony of the Seas was there that day, which is massive, thousands and thousands of people. So it made for a very busy port area. But I really do like that port area. We walked around a little bit. This was one port where my friend and I decided to go to the beach. And so we made our way through the port area, through all the different vendors. And this actually is one port, which I was a little bit surprised, where there were a lot of the vendors standing outside of their shops trying to get you to come in. And I know that happens, but that was really the only port on this cruise where that happened a lot. Which was a little odd to me, considering it is a port that's been developed by the cruise lines. We made our way outside, and we wanted to go to Mahahual Beach, which is less than 2 miles away. And you can either get there, by taxi, or sometimes they have golf carts that'll take people over there. We actually did a deal right at the exit from the port, the port area, where we paid the $20 that included our taxi ride over. It included, the chairs, and one of those little mini resort areas that you have access to bathrooms. It included a couple of drinks. You could order food and stuff on the beach. And I've been to that beach a couple of times, and it's one of my favorites anywhere I have been. Yeah. So really, really enjoy that. Highly recommend taking a taxi over to Mahahual Beach, and paying a few bucks to get a chair, and just having a really nice, relaxing day on the beach. So highly recommend that. I'm very curious to see what will happen there, because I know Royal is taking over the Costa Maya cruise port, and they're making it that Perfect Day Mexico. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, and I'm a little concerned about what's going to happen to all of those vendors in that area of beach, whether Royal is going to utilize that and help to employ those people, or whether they're going to make more beach area at the actual cruise port area, kind of like what they have done, with Perfect Day at Coco Cay and at Labadee. So very curious to see what happens there.
Yeah, because it's such a charming little beach. I remember going there, gosh, it was probably a decade or so ago, but just sitting on the beach, having a beer, and they walked up to me and was like, "Hey, do you want a lobster?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" The dude went out and dove into the beach, swam out, came back with a lobster, and they cooked it for me and brought it to me. It was the coolest thing ever.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was so cool. So yeah, I echo your sentiment on the beach there at Costa Maya. So after that, you head back to the port of Tampa. How was the debarkation process?
Super simple. Because we had wheelchair assistance getting off, we went to a special area where we had to wait. We had to change our debarkation numbers, the order in which we could get off the ship, because we had an early flight, but it was no problem. I mean, I went to guest services, told them that we had an early flight. They gave us one of the very first debarkation, groups. And so, we went to the wheelchair assistance area, waited for our group to be called, and they took us right off. And, my friend and I were very willing to, push the wheelchairs off the ship, but mm-hmm. I just don't think that we're allowed to do that, while we're in their care. So we had to wait, again, for, some of the ship staff to come and do that. But again, didn't take very long. I mean, we might have been in there 15 or 20 minutes. No problem. Even the Port of Tampa uses facial recognition for the customs and the debarkation processes. So very easy. Walked right through. The worst part about the whole debark process was getting to the waiting area where we had to wait for the wheelchairs because, the elevators on these smaller ships are somewhat limited. And, we were dealing with a wheelchair and a rollator. So we needed an elevator that was fairly empty. A lot of people going up, a lot of people going down. So we had to wait a while to get an elevator. But really, once we got to that area, not a big deal. The one tip I will use in getting off the ship is, especially if you have to go to the terminal to pick up your luggage, use the porters because the tip that you give them to me is well worth it. I mean, you point out your bags, they put them on their dolly, and you bypass the line of people waiting to get off, individually. So even for the convenience of that, I recommend using the porters. It helps them, it helps you, it just makes things easier and less stressful. So, I'm all in favor of making things less stressful whenever we can. So
yeah, and speaking of tips, do you have any to offer for any first-time cruisers, either sailing the Western Caribbean or sailing on Radiance of the Seas?
Let's see. I think my tip one I mentioned earlier is do the My Time dining. If you like My Time dining, but you want a set time and you like the experience of having the same, waiters and staff every night, on embarkation day, go to the maitre d' and see if you can schedule a My Time dining time and get a set table. Just makes the experience good, especially if you have good dining staff. And ours were tremendous. So made for a really excellent dining experience, to have the My Time dining, the set table, the great staff. So definitely recommend doing that. Second, again, if you have any sort of accessibility issues whatsoever, get in touch with the accessibility department. Make any arrangements ahead of time. And if it is an issue for you, try to do your research. There's a lot of great information on the Royal Caribbean website, on cruise websites like yours, on travel websites about accessibility at the different piers, what is available in terms of transportation and things like that. Those are really my highlights. I mean, I am a plan person. So I like to know every detail as much as I can. So if you like planning, I would do your research, but otherwise those are really my tips, the dining and then the accessibility and the research.
Do you feel the value was there for the price you paid?
So for this cruise in particular, I think the ship was starting to get pretty full by the time we booked. Mm-hmm. So I think we probably paid a little bit more for this cruise than we normally would have. But that said, still an amazing cruise, an amazing experience. The staff on board was excellent. I thought the food was great. And I understand we're not in the same cruising environment that we were in 2019 and even early 2020, where there were lots of deals out there. I think cruising has just, really exploded in the last several years. And, if you really want to try for the best deals, I say book early, right? Book as early as possible. But, overall, yeah, I thought it was fair value, but again, shame on me for maybe waiting a little bit longer than I should have to book.
What was the biggest highlight of this cruise for y'all?
Oh man, I have to say the service. Again, the dining service, our cabin steward, anything at all that we needed anytime, absolutely amazing. And that's something that, people talk about, how they feel that service has changed on a lot of cruises in the last several years. And there's been a lot of cost-cutting measures that have gone into place. Like on Royal, it's, 1 time a day cabin service versus 2. I do wish that was still the case, to have morning service and then evening turn down, but it didn't really take away from our experience. And our cabin steward, he said, if you need anything, even if it's not when we chose evening turn downs. We chose evening cleaning service because we knew we would be out of the cabin around dinner time every day. So, but even in the morning, if we needed something, we knew he was there and we could ask him for it. So, while it's a minor inconvenience, still not that big of a deal for us. But again, the service and the attention to detail to me is still there. And that's something that I really enjoy and appreciate on Royal Caribbean. So I hope that that doesn't change too much into the future, but thought overall, nice small ship, excellent service, clean, decent entertainment, great ports. Can't ask for much more than that. And a week on a cruise is better than any week at home. So,
yep, you got that right. We've been talking with Matt about his 7-night cruise on Radiance of the Seas. As always, Matt, good talking to you. Thank you.
Doug, thank you very much for having me again. Really appreciate it and really nice talking with you. Thank you.
Just back from a cruise? Let's talk about it. Email Doug at cruiseradio.net.
A big question we get at Cruise Radio is, how do I know if I need trip insurance? Simple answer. If you're getting on a plane, taking a road trip, or getting on a cruise ship, you need to have travel insurance. Hey, it's Doug Parker from my friends at tripinsurance.com. Not only does tripinsurance.com protect your vacation investment, but it also gives you peace of mind in case anything were to go wrong on your trip. How do they do it? They offer 3 different types of trip insurance policies. Good, better, and best. One policy for every vacation budget. But it doesn't just stop there. They're up to 40% lower when you shop around on other comparison sites. Plus, tripinsurance.com offers 24-hour customer support before, during, and after your trip, online claims assistance, and travel alerts to let you know what's going on at your destination. But find out for yourself. Check out tripinsurance.com.
All right, Dougie, let's see what we got for you, buddy.
Cruise Radio is produced at the tripinsurance.com studios in Jacksonville, Florida. Get cruise news, ship reviews, and money-saving tips every Thursday on Cruise Radio. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show. If you want to help spread the word, give Cruise Radio a 5-star review. Find Cruise Radio where you listen to your favorite podcast or online at cruiseradio.net. I'm your announcer,